Chris Haydon. We're covering with BCM One. Chris is going to be speaking about mega bandwidth issues to ensure tenant satisfaction and lease attractiveness. A little bio on Chris. Chris Haydon is an information technology and telecommunications management professional with over 18 years of experience in internetworking and leadership. Chris came to BCM in 2013 as a sales engineer, providing pre-sales design support for SIP, hosted IP, PBX, MPLS, a lot of acronyms we throw out here just to keep everybody on their toes. We don't expect you to know all the acronyms. I promise during my presentation I'm going to hold back on acronyms, but in every industry, we all have our acronyms, so I think it's job security. Managed data center applications and LAN WAN management and monitoring solutions. Prior to joining BCM, Chris spent over 4 years running the sales, marketing, production, product development, and sales engineering functions for Telecom Limited, located in the Cayman Islands. I want that job. I think that's a great job, especially with the winter coming up. It was there that Chris worked with the largest clearing banks, hedge fund administrators, law firms, and accounting firms from all over the world that operated in the hedge fund ecosystem in the Cayman Islands. So very popular place to operate those businesses. Chris had why did you come back, Chris? I mean, Chris has almost 30 years of experience working in sales for a variety of large enterprises, such as Cablevision, Sprint, AT&T, and Verizon. His work at Verizon as a sales engineer manager provided him with a valuable experience in providing pre-sale design and engineering support for complex voice data and integrated solutions for both domestic, U.S., and international locations. Chris possesses broad technical knowledge combined with outstanding performance and creative problem-solving skills in strategic and tactical areas. So I want you to think about, he's got a lot of experience. So I want to think of some questions as he's giving a presentation. We want to make it a little bit more interactive. So please welcome Chris with his topic today. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, good morning. I'm not Chris, but before he goes into the technical overview of what we're doing, I just wanted to briefly explain why we're doing it and why we're here. So I'm Megan Nealon. I'm the Director of Sales at BCM One. I've been with the company for 9 years. Not as experienced or the resume that Chris has, but have some experience specifically in this industry. So I think we all have had the client or the tenant who has said, I have Fios at home, I pay $100 for it, it's faster than my internet in my office, why can't I just have that? And there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but the point is that even the person who's farthest removed from the day-to-day IT responsibilities understands that having fast internet is what makes their business run efficiently. So we took that concept and that experience of knowing that at BCM. We've been in business 23 years. We work with all the different providers, and about 4 years ago, we worked with a building management company who said, I want to redo my building. I want to get out of the multi-tenant space. I want to have single tenants with big names. What do you guys think on the telecom side I should do that to accomplish that? So we looked at their building. We made some basic recommendations that most of the people in this room would know. Having 2 entry points, having fiber connectivity, having a secure room in your basement, having a secure riser, having that security to give your clients that comfort. Within 6 months, they were able to get Apple, Yelp, and a retail company called Net-a-Porter. So it worked. This year, in the last 6 months, almost 3.5 years later, they got Turner Broadcasting and Adobe in that same building. So it's an investment that you might have to spend a little money up front to set your building up, but it'll keep giving you the benefits of it, as you'll get those names of those big clients who are looking to have that reliability and that scalability and the redundancy of their building. So what Chris is going to walk you through today is, how do you make your building a smart building? How do you bring in the infrastructure that gives your clients or your tenants the intelligent network that gives you the direct connections you need to all the applications that they're looking for? Technology is constantly changing, and you have to be a step ahead of it in order to be able to provide your clients with what they're looking for. The fastest most reliable connections so that they can run their business and not have to worry about it. I won't give you the secret sauce of the building management company we work with and how they advertise for it, but it is proven that it will work. It'll make your buildings more attractive, and it's something that you can market to the industry so that you can get those big tenants. And with that, I will introduce Chris.
Thank you, Megan. So thank you very much for having BCM One here today. And I'm just going to begin with, you've heard my bio. Most of my career has been spent here in New York City with Verizon, and I worked for Bell Atlantic, Verizon in the core. So a lot of my engineering time was spent designing where multiplexers and where FlashWave and Fujitsu or Alcatel, Cisco boxes should sit in a lot of your buildings. So today we're going to, here's the agenda for my discussion today. We're really going to get into intelligent buildings, smart buildings, and I really want to talk about correlating what you see as a business, as a building owner or building manager, or someone who's in the ecosystem of the building trade here in New York City, and what your tenants are seeing as well. So the first slide I want to put up here is really just talking about cloud computing. So, cloud computing is real today. This year we'll probably see the biggest increase in cloud services than we've seen in the past, and the next year's on from that. Cloud computing, if you don't know, is just turning any service, turning into an as a service today. So that could range from anything from voice services, where customers are using hosted IP PBXs today, which reside in the cloud, to CRM services, to ERP services. So everything really can be turned into a service today. And what your tenants are doing today is their infrastructure ranges from applications to runtime or compute resources, to databases, to security, servers, virtual servers, network elements, and storage. And as a services kind of go up that stack. So infrastructure as a service may range up where customers have put physical or virtual servers, networking devices, storage devices out into the cloud. Platform as a service would be where I'm moving actually my database, my security elements into the cloud. And then software as a service is really where I'm really running my applications in the cloud. So companies are running human resources, accounting, you name it, they're moving this stuff to the cloud. So we're seeing, companies like Salesforce booming today. So, and I'm sure that you see it with your own tenants. The footprints for data centers within space today have shrunk, and they continue to shrink. So the need for on-site large data centers with redundancies is dropping because most of their compute power now sits in these nondescript buildings on the outskirts of major metropolitan areas, and they're backed up in other locations throughout the world. So, like I said, cloud is real today. And again, you're seeing this, I'm sure, with what your tenants are building in. And again, what makes a building intelligent? From a stakeholder's standpoint, you want to take advantage of technology. So everything is really driven by technology. That whole smart concept really is where I'm leveraging latest and greatest technologies, the bigger bandwidth, and I'm including this into my infrastructure. I just throw in here a little piece on what the building automation systems do today. A lot of these buildings that we still look at here in New York City are still built on copper, serial connections for automated services. So this could be fire, this could be HVAC, this could be all these systems. So those infrastructures kind of mirror where a lot of the customer networks and a lot of the customer data networks for voice and data that we're building out today. So an interesting slide that you'll see here is the Internet of Things. This is a Cisco slide. And believe it or not, Cisco is getting into building automation. And how they're doing that is they're creating standards now that will incorporate some of those older serial connections that you have today in your buildings for automation. And what they're doing is they're producing routers and switches that allow for me to integrate those serial connections and those serial servers into Ethernet services as well. So what I can do is on the local area network, or the infrastructure which would sit within a customer space or within a building space, I can now integrate a lot of the serial connections that I'm using for building automation. And I could do that using local area networks. I could use that by breaking up those local area networks into virtual local area networks and be able to marry that across the infrastructure. And I'm sure if you know the term SCADA, which is supervisory control and data acquisition, this would be familiar to you as well, because this is really the fourth generation of SCADA. So when your automation companies who are building automation analytics, they're building against kind of these standards. And what's SCADA? So SCADA, just to give you like a history, and it's really where customers' voice and data networks have come as well, is back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of manufacturers were building equipment for building automation or for data networks or for mainframe computers, whatnot. And there was no interoperability, and there were no standards at that time. So a lot of these bodies, these standard bodies, were trying to push for interoperability, interconnectivity, so I could have multiple manufacturers' equipment, and all that equipment could talk to each other. And SCADA really has developed over the last couple of years as data networks and data standards have evolved as well, to the point where this is, again, the fourth generation of SCADA. And what this is saying, I could have one ubiquitous network, I could have all my controls, I could have all the security around those controls, and I can do this across, say, one Ethernet network within a building. And I could integrate all these controls. So, again, going back to what your tenants are looking for, and as I mentioned, the correlation between what from a building owner perspective, where your technology is going, so is the customers. So today, it's not unlike that we're probably by the next quarter, we're going to see carrier services offering 40 gigabits of transport. It was all IP-based, it's all internet standards, and you're going to see carriers, maximize the capacity that fiber optic can give a customer, and customers demand it. It's like that Moore's law. If you give customers the computing power, they're going to use it. It's the same thing with network. If you give customers the bandwidth, they're going to use it as well. So your customers are demanding, core routing and switching services. This could be either on-site, where I've extended a lot of the carrier services out to my building locations. They're looking, they're not buying servers today, they're virtualizing servers. They'll have very few host servers today, and they'll have hundreds of virtual machines that could sit on those servers. They're looking for video on demand to be supported. They want to collaborate with offices or partners located all throughout the world on one network. And they want, within the building, within the space that they're working they want that ability to be able to transform their business. So they see the building that they're in or the space that they're renting as leveraging their business to get their business to the next level. We do a lot of these shared space tenants here in New York City, so we have a lot of these incubator customers, and we're very happy when we see like these incubator customers move out of these shared spaces and start to look at office space for themselves. So again, this mobility, security, any-to-any connection, these are really the strategic building blocks that your customers are looking for. And this is a really great slide because this is really what brings this all together, right? It brings the building services that you saw in the slide before this, but it brings all these services together, and it marries this with the tenant requirements of today. So you see that from a monitoring and control, from a monitoring standpoint, We work with a lot of customers. One of the largest building automation building automation firms is one of our customers. It begins with a J. I won't mention it, but I'm not sure if they're here today. But these automation companies, they're building monitoring platforms that will allow for me to have smart controllers, smart sensors, and it's all IP based. So I could put an IP address on any of these controllers, any of these sensors, and I get back a tremendous amount of information on what's going. And we've got other third parties that are writing these check features where I can use simple network management protocol, SNMP, to get these checks and to take all this information and download it. So some of the statistics that I like to put out here is, in addition to where we're seeing the marketplace go, is that and what's really allowing a lot of this to happen is IP. So Internet Protocol version 4 now. I don't know if you keep up with what's going on in the internet, but Internet version 4, ARIN, which is the gatekeeper for IP addresses, they've run out of version 4 addresses. So right now there's over 4.3 billion IP version 4 addresses out there, but the ones that are actually in use today are 734 million. So there's a tremendous amount of IP version 4 addresses floating out there. So what companies usually will do is they'll use a couple different mechanisms to hold on to as many IP version 4 addresses as they can. They'll use subnetting, they'll use private NAT addressing as well. But the next wave is going to be this IP version 6. So IP version 6, it's it's available today. Most of the equipment, most of the data equipment, the voice equipment, the sensors, the controllers are built for both IP version 4 and IP version 6. IP version 6, there's no limit to the number of addresses that you can have. They say that there's so many addresses available that every grain of sand on the beach could have a separate IPv6 address. And what that means, it's easier for me to set up SNMP checks and traps to take information, collect information, put it into data analytic tools, and be able to get a good picture on what my building is, how my building is performing. And it's the same thing with data services today. As customers move towards IPv6, they're going to have the capabilities to put an IP address on software, virtual machines, hardened machines, network elements, and they'll be able to track all this and bring it into a common monitoring platform and have a lot of remote control over those services as well. So again, as these networks mature, more applications are moved out to the cloud, IPv6, the standardization of a lot of these protocols, it allows us to really build out and include a lot of different devices that you normally would not see. So again, we go to this intelligent network. So, your properties sit at the bottom. BCM One would sit in the middle between these cloud services. And what we're doing today in a lot of these properties is, from a consulting standpoint, we'll sit with the building managers and we'll take a look at what facilities are in the buildings today. So traditionally, from an ILEC perspective, so here in New York City, the incumbent local exchange carrier is Verizon. Verizon, we used to bring big multiplexers into the building, Fujitsu's, Alcatel, Cisco, you name it. We'd have a space in the building, a rack in a secure location, and then we would terminate customer services onto that multiplexer. And as customers' bandwidth demands increased, we would just simply insert cards and slots and build out those services. But really what changed that whole game was Ethernet. So Ethernet, it's a a standard that's prevalent in local area networks, and customers were clamoring for carriers to extend Ethernet out to building locations. So Verizon was a little slow to the game. We started to see a lot of these CLECs come in, competitive local exchange carriers, or big bandwidth providers, and they would simply bypass the multiplex environment, and they'd bring their own network interface devices and NIDs, slap them on the wall, and they were lighting all our customers. Verizon soon moved towards Ethernet services. They've changed out a lot of their infrastructure today. And even today, we don't see Verizon, with a lot of these building retrofits, we don't see Verizon putting those old multiplexers infrastructure in the buildings today. We see their fiber strategy as FiOS. So we see FiOS coming in, and we see a lot of that used. FiOS access for business, which really was going to kill a lot of Verizon's LEC business. But Verizon seems to be focused more on wireless today. So what we've done is we know that there's ILECs and CLECs. There's a lot of choices for tenants, and they could range from telephone companies, traditional telephone companies, to cable companies, to fixed wireless companies, to wireless 3G, 4G customers. So what we do is we'll work with you. We'll take a look at that building. We'll look at how many entry points are into your building, how many risers go into your building. As Megan mentioned, we like to see security around risers, security around those rooms. If it's not there, we'll make recommendations. We'll also work with the ILECs in those markets also to talk about maybe alternate serving wire center services. So the way most ILECs have built out infrastructure is you're tied to a local central office within the ILEC infrastructure. We have the ability to have services come from a secondary central office, and that's what alternate serving wire center services. That requires usually construction, a build. We see this usually in hospitals and public buildings, anywhere that requires 100% uptime and redundancy. But a lot of this a lot of the redundancy piece of this is we can use redundant service connections from multiple carriers as well. So what we'll do usually is we'll take a look at what carriers are in those buildings. We'll bring in carriers if we've got commitments from spend levels, because today most carriers require you to commit to a certain spend level before they'll build into your building. We'll manage that process, and then we'll use unique backup services, which could be anybody from a cable supplier to a fixed wireless provider. And we're very lucky here in New York City, because we've got companies like Exchange and Rainbow that we can use microwave technology to back up data networks. And we also use satellite in some cases, and we'll also use 3G and 4G. We'll also make recommendations. I think they're going to talk about distributed antenna systems, DAS systems within buildings. These are key elements, especially like buildings like the Freedom Tower, where you need to get signals up into the upper levels of buildings. You want to, at that point, in addition to being a building manager, you're actually a spectrum manager at that point. So you're managing, the spectrum in the building. You can work with your wireless carriers. They may invest in it. In most cases, you want to have all comers come in and be able to give people ubiquitous connection throughout your building. I don't know about you, but it's very frustrating when I walk into a building and I lose my cell connection in an elevator. Years ago it was crazy, right? But today it's doing business on the way we do on cell phones. It's a requirement that we have ubiquitous connections throughout a building. So again, this is kind of what we do. We don't talk about prime carriers anymore. We represent over 200 carriers, BCM One, and we bring these hybrid solutions to our customers. And again, from a BCM One perspective, we work with phone, voicemail, hosted email, cloud-based services, disaster recovery service, co-location, network security, internet access. We also do layer 3 VPN connections, such as MPLS. I don't want to throw in a lot of acronyms, but And we will manage, and what we really do is we work with our customers very closely. We work with their building managers very closely on what can be delivered from a service perspective, and then again, what needs to be spec'd out as well. And again, the benefits to this to the building owner is, you get a better rating with Wired NYC. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with Wired NYC. I've done a lot of walkthroughs with Wired NYC throughout the buildings here in New York the last couple of years. So it's a very, it's a prestigious plaque to put in front of your building. A lot of your .com, your emerging technology companies look for that. They look for that you've got, numerous carrier connections, full redundancies in that building. Again, broader market for tenants based upon services, less construction, less cost, reduction in electrical. Like I said, the footprints within your buildings today for carriers are much smaller. We work with the carriers to build that out as well, to talk about where IDFs and MDFs need to be located, data centers need to be located. And again, improves your tenant relationships. And of course, the benefits to the tenant are, really increased reliability, 24/7 support, disaster recovery, and flexible as well. So I believe that brings me to the end. Here's a little commercial for BCM One. If you'd like more information, my colleagues are here today, sitting in the front table. And if you have any questions, just shoot them out.
Question.
Yes, sir.
What are some of the bigger challenges that you're finding with the building owners, managers, with regard to bringing up services in the building?
That's a great question. I think I think we've got some really good relationships with the building managers, some of the larger ones that we work with. Their goal is to fill that space, and a lot of times, we need to marry technology with and the requirements of that tenant with the realities of the building as well. So I think some of the challenges come from really marrying what the goals are for the tenant with the goal of the building manager. A lot of times we'll talk about the requirements that may not be in that particular property. Like a lot of times we may not have the ability to have dual risers, or we may not have IDFs built out for the specifications for that client. So we try to work as closely as possible with both the tenant and the building manager to overcome any of those things that may be a roadblock to the tenant moving in. Yeah, that's a great point. Here in Manhattan, we've got. Go ahead, Nugget. You could.
Squeaky voice again. I was just saying that in Manhattan specifically, there's a lot of older buildings, and trying to bring in new technology into older buildings can be challenging. A lot of times it requires core drilling, which can be a disruption in service to other tenants that aren't looking for this infrastructure maybe yet. So a lot of times timing has to play a part in looking to redo your building. If you're doing construction, it's always the best time to get another entry point into your building. If you're going to do some digging anyway, it just makes sense. But that's probably the hardest thing we found, is finding the right time to do the work to make these improvements.
And I would say the other thing is with regards to building control systems, we built, buildings today have, fire suppression, they've got fire detection, you may have pre-action systems in place too. If a customer is going to move millions of dollars in electronics into that location, we're going to have a plan set up for, how fire is managed within some of those spaces, and that's where we really talk about when we look at that Internet of Things, is integrating detection, smoke detection, fire detection with systems that, where we can create infrastructure that's dry, and then certain events would trigger it to become a wet system, and then, the customer has the ability to at least prepare sometimes, for what has to happen. Also, sprinklers are becoming a big issue today in New York City, because a lot of the buildings that traditionally were not required to have sprinkler systems now have got to have sprinkler systems in place. So a lot of that planning has to go around what the particular tenants have in place, areas where they have to be protected, and where sensors have to be put in, and where modifications may need to be done as well. Yes, sir.
We work at when you have campuses or buildings, same thing. When you have data and have different pipes flowing across the single integrated network, how do you handle security?
Sure.
Yeah, when you have a single network in the building and you're running all this various data over it, how do you handle security? I know the BACnet standard that was developed that we use for building control systems, the original focus wasn't so much. Nowadays you get hackers going in trying to get in through any port they can get in through and getting into vital information where our information may not be that vital, but it may be a port that you can get into. And how do you handle the security with all this stuff running on the same network?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the largest breaches of last year was Target, and that was done through a building automation system that had a public IP address left on, where the hackers were actually doing war dialing against IP addresses and found this IP address, and then were able to get into the point of sale and all the systems within the organization. So that's a great question. So in the old world with serial connections, where I have the point-to-point serial connections, there was little security that I could add to it. I mean, it's easy to tap into twisted pair because it's exposed, and so a lot of times you can get into some of these networks. As I converge onto Ethernet networks or local area networks as well, I've got to build in security into that. So what some of the standards like TLS is a standard that authenticates users. So I can build this type of authentication into who's coming into my network. We can have a handshake, and we could exchange credentials. We could have a common key that we would support as well before access is allowed in. From a physical security, we like to see stuff in pipe. We don't like to see cables laying around. And then I could build from a equipment standpoint, from the routers and the newer routers that support the old serial as well as the Ethernet networks. I could build in access controls, so only known IP addresses are going to be allowed into that. And then I can monitor that as well. So I can build that into my monitoring system as well. This building automation company that begins with a J does that today. So what they'll do is they'll go into, say, the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, and they'll say, we're going to converge all of our systems onto your existing local area network, which consists of, say, Cisco switching infrastructure. And what we prefer to do is we actually prefer to take on management of that infrastructure as well. So they'll take on all the local area network switches and all the closets, the IDFs, the MDFs. They'll manage it from a port level out of their NOC, multiple NOCs, and they're looking for intrusion detection. So they're looking for behavior that would lead to believe that a penetration is about to be attempted. So they're going to harden those networks, and they're going to be responsible for that infrastructure as well as the automation, the building automation infrastructure as well. So, and they use all the tools that we use today in the data world: firewalling, packet filtering, packet inspection, access control, authentication, all those tools.
Chris, I have a question regarding I heard a rumor about the costs that the building owner was charging, and I don't know if you can handle this. Maybe Jeff can, but I'm going to kind of launch the bomb that the costs were kind of escalating regarding the minimum point of entry, if you will, secondary core coming through the building at X dollars. Pathways and spaces at Y dollars. Do you have any experience with regard to the escalation of the cost, either at a multiple of annual or monthly cost associated with these that's available to the building owner that you could share?
Sure. So just give you a cost. I mean, we use the thumbnail of to run fiber in New York City is about $1 million a mile to run fiber. And then to bring that into a building, that cost could range from, maybe tens of thousands of dollars to a couple $1 million as well. A lot of these buildings after Sandy, a lot of the foundations they've created these bladder systems in a lot of these foundations. So for me to penetrate those bladder systems, to build in secondary entry points, you're talking millions of dollars to do that. So that's the cost, kind of the cost benefit of what you believe your tenants' requirements are going to be, And, just to mention about Sandy, I think we in New York City, I was in Cayman, so I really didn't experience, but I did watch it on TV. But I think we learned a lot in New York City from a building perspective, like what to do and what not to do. Like we learned that, you can store generator fuel on upper floors, but if the pumps are in the basement and they're flooded, they're very useless. We did from electronics. We saw a lot of the hospitals in New York City had used the most unusable space within the building, of course, is the basement. They put a lot of their data center equipment in these basements. They flooded and they were down. Luckily, we had redundancies built in where they had data centers located outside of New York City, and of course also who would have thought that actually a class 5 switch, which is an ILEC switch, it's usually in these hardened bunkers, which are these central office locations. Who would have ever thought that a class 5 switch would go underwater as well? I think that was a historical moment for ILECs as well. And that's really pushed, pushed the movement of SIP and having your local telephone numbers located on other switches. But like I said, I think I answered your original question. From a cost perspective, it really depends on what that job is going to require. And I think materials have gone up in price, fiber costs have gone up in price. Electronics have stayed static. I would say that the cost of a lot of these Ethernet NIDs and switches and routers are pretty static. And we've got some competitions in that area as well. So, Yes, sir.
I thought I was talking loud enough. Some of the new Active Directory Azure services, features that are built in Windows 10 allow for biometric identification through facial recognition, fingerprinting, and other mechanisms. What level of integration in your backbone and security services are utilizing that? If you're providing that, service level agreement, anybody that's putting in an IP phone system that's hosted would have a dark store backup system, which would have an auto attendant answering elsewhere and then transferring calls to the employee's cell phones so that the client wouldn't know that maybe they have a dark star condition where the building has no electricity and the calls are still getting through. I'm just kind of curious what BCM One is doing.
Sure, that's a great question. A lot of these cloud services like hosted IPPBX, session initiation protocol, SIP, hosted Exchange, Office 365, all these cloud-based services are really, the reason they're booming today is really around the APIs that are built to marry these systems together. So I can actually I can go to most of these hosted IPPBX providers and integrate my Exchange environment, which would include Active Directory. And I could also integrate that with a lot of the other softwares or applications that I'm using, to run my business as well. And that includes a lot of the building automation tools as well. So as I believe as the business automation business creates applications for tenants to use, portals that they can take a look at, analytical tools that was mentioned, a lot of these APIs are being built to integrate them into those environments to create these ecosystems that would encompass voice, data, security, physical security, all these different elements within space. So, and it's really that API. You can go to these shows. We do BCM One, we represent both private and public cloud services. So when you go to these public cloud services events like for Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure, you see all the vendors there are all building APIs to integrate with AWS and Azure. And it's really a lot of unique integration that they're doing. And like I said, it could be these physical perimeter applications to these application integration as well. So, and it continues to expand as well. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
My question is, I've been in the service office business for a number of years, and we've had several iterations of an intelligent building concept. I'm curious as to what your thought is, whether that service office environment is going to prosper with this or going to disappear.
I think that's up to the vendors that are involved in this. I think that the service, like when you mentioned service, I know that that there's a framework for that as well within SOA, which is more of like an integration. I guess you would say kind of like a blueprint for developers to write applications within that space that would integrate with other services as well. So as these applications are written to integrate various functions within the business and to pull down those analytics that were mentioned and take that data and turn it into real data that a customer could read and understand. I think, that as that evolves, you'll see a lot more of that going on. And you'll see, like I said, when you see Cisco involved in business automation, you got to figure, they're kind of on the right path with regards to where that future is going. When it comes to analytics, I mean, analytics is all around us today. You can walk into a Gap store today, and if you've got your Wi-Fi enabled, they're going to track your movement throughout the store. They're going to take that movement and they're going to put it against analytic tools that are going to go back to Gap management, and Gap management is going to use that to figure out how to get people to move within the store. We, from BCM One, when we work with customers who are implementing Wi-Fi access points, that's one of the first things they're asking for is what analytic tools I can integrate within those Wi-Fi so I can track, movements. We do a lot of work with retail chains that are doing that today. I hope that answers your question. Yes, sir?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question I'm not actually sure that you'll be able to answer, but if you can, I'd appreciate your insights. So recently I've been looking at the work of Jeremy Rifkin talking about the third industrial revolution. And one of the points he brings up is that down the road, one of the key criteria for a building will be the generation of its own electricity. That electricity then being managed by a version of the internet. And so that either a building manages its own electricity or maybe it gets shared electricity from another building that has extra capacity. Can you give me a peek down the road as to how this might be coming? Because my understanding is that Europe is beginning to move more aggressively in this direction. And hopefully we will at some point.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not a power specialist, but I do know here in New York City, like NYU does have a cogeneration plant on the east side now that they've built, that they're generating most of their, good part of their electrical needs. So I can see that, I can see those types of technologies being key parts of buildings, future buildings, retrofits. And I could see the network playing an important part in those controls and monitoring, security, those elements. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. My cards are over by the door as well. Thank you.
Thank you.